right, listen. If you've ever been stuck in a relationship where one person keeps pulling away every time you get close, this is for you. Let me paint the picture. You're doing all the right things. You're patient, you're kind, you don't pressure, and still they shut down. They ghost. They disappear into their emotional bunker like it's a survival instinct. Sound familiar? Now, here's the truth. Nobody tells you. You're not going to fix this by talking it out. You're not going to break through that wall by pushing harder, loving louder, or waiting them out. What actually works? It's something subtle, something powerful, and something that happens without them even realizing it. It's called invisible reparenting. Today, I'm going to show you how this quiet behind-the-scenes shift doesn't just soothe your nervous system, it cracks open theirs. It bypasses defenses. It reaches that scared shutdown part of them without confrontation, manipulation, or control. You're not here to force connection. You're here to become the safe space they never had. And when you do that, everything changes. Let's dive in. The avoidant attachment trap is a frustrating and often painful cycle that plays out in many relationships, especially when one partner craves emotional closeness and the other instinctively pulls away. It doesn't always start that way. In fact, in the early stages, the avoidant partner might seem engaged, interested, even intensely connected. But as emotional intimacy deepens, something shifts. They begin to create distance. They stop texting back right away. They cancel plans. They get quiet when the conversation turns vulnerable. They stop showing up fully, and the more you try to reconnect, the more they seem to retreat. This isn't because they don't care. It's not because they're cold, heartless, or playing games. What's happening is much deeper and largely unconscious. Avoidant attachment is the result of early experiences where closeness was either unsafe, inconsistent, or smothering. Somewhere along the line, they learned that needing someone else equaled danger, disappointment, or a loss of control. So, as adults, when someone starts to matter too much, their nervous system sounds the alarm. Too close, too risky, pull back. It's not a choice. It's a survival response. And here's where the trap comes in. Most partners, especially those with anxious tendencies, respond to this withdrawal with more effort. They reach out more, they ask more questions, they try to fix the dynamic, assuming it's a communication issue or a misunderstanding. But to the avoidant, all of this reads as pressure. It feels like someone trying to invade a space they've built to feel safe, so they pull away further. And that triggers the other person's fear of abandonment, which escalates their pursuit, and round it goes. Both people feel hurt. Both feel misunderstood. And yet neither is truly the enemy here. The trap is in the invisible dance of nervous systems that don't speak the same language. One says, "Come closer. I need you to feel safe." The other says, "Stay back. I need space to feel safe." And unless this dynamic is interrupted, it breeds resentment, exhaustion, and disconnection. Here's the thing that's hard to accept, especially if you're the one chasing. You cannot talk someone out of an avoidant response. Logic doesn't land when someone is in a fear state. Reassurance only works when the nervous system is open to receiving it. When an avoidant partner goes into withdrawal mode, their brain isn't processing information like it normally would. They're not sitting there analyzing your words and weighing your intentions. They're reacting on autopilot, just like you might when you're triggered. That's why traditional relationship advice often fails in these scenarios. You can't solve a nervous system pattern with words. You can't negotiate safety. You create it. And that's where the reframe begins, when you stop trying to get the avoidant to change, and instead you shift how you show up, not to manipulate them, not to win them back, but to stop participating in the push-pull dynamic altogether. The real trap isn't just the avoidant's fear of intimacy, it's your own fear of disconnection. And as long as that fear is running the show, you'll keep reacting to their withdrawal as a threat, which keeps the loop alive. The way out begins when you recognize that your power isn't in convincing someone to come closer. It's in becoming the grounded, safe presence that doesn't escalate when they pull away. Because when you stop chasing, when you stop proving, when you stop trying to fix them, you're no longer reinforcing the very fear that drives their avoidance. You're showing their nervous system something different. You're proving through your presence that closeness doesn't have to mean pressure, that love doesn't have to mean loss, that someone can stay grounded even when they retreat. This isn't easy. It takes awareness, it takes patience, and it takes a deep level of self-regulation. But it works, not because you're changing them, but but because you're breaking the energetic pattern that keeps both of you stuck. In the next part, we'll talk about how this shift starts with you, not as a tactic, but as a transformation. Because when you learn how to hold your own safety, you create the conditions for real connection. Not by force, but by becoming the invitation they didn't even know they needed. When someone you care about starts pulling away, your first instinct is probably to reach for words. You try to explain. You try to reassure. You want to understand what's wrong, and you want them to understand you. That's human. We're wired to seek connection and clarity. But if you're dealing with someone with avoidant attachment, your words often don't land. In fact, they can have the opposite effect. The more you talk, the more they shut down. The more you seek closeness through conversation, the more it feels like pressure to them. It's not that what you're saying is wrong, it's that their nervous system can't hear it the way you intend. This is where most people get stuck. They think if I could just find the right thing to say, they'd finally get it. They'd finally stay. But what they don't realize is that the avoidant partner isn't operating from logic in those moments. They're operating from survival. Their body has already decided that closeness is a threat. And once that threat response is activated, the thinking brain goes offline. So you're pouring your heart out to someone who, in that moment, can't actually receive it. It's like trying to tune a radio to the wrong frequency. No matter how clear your message is, it's not being picked up. And if you keep trying to send that message louder or more urgently, the static only grows. That's because communication isn't just about the words you use. It's about the energy behind them. It's about your nervous system and theirs. When someone is avoidant, their body is constantly scanning for signs of danger, even in subtle ways. If your energy carries anxiety, urgency, or unspoken fear, they feel it. Even if your words are calm, the undertone of "I need you to respond" comes through, and it reinforces their instinct to create space. Here's what actually works. Instead of focusing on what to say, focus on how you feel in your body, because that's what they're responding to, your regulation, not your reasoning. If your presence feels safe, calm, and non-demanding, it sends a signal to their nervous system that there's no danger. And that subtle energetic shift is often what opens the door to connection. Not a perfectly worded text or a heartfelt speech. Think about the times you felt most seen or comforted. Chances are it wasn't just because of the words someone said, it was the way they said them. Their tone, their stillness, their grounded presence. That's what created safety. That's what allowed your defenses to soften. And the same is true for an avoidant person. They're not looking for someone to fix them, convince them, or chase them. Deep down, they're looking for someone whose energy doesn't spike when they take space. Someone who can stay steady even when things feel uncertain. Someone who doesn't make closeness feel like pressure. This is where your power lies, not in what you say, but in how you show up. You could say absolutely nothing and still create a shift in the dynamic simply by being emotionally neutral and self-contained. When you regulate your own nervous system, you become a mirror of safety. You show the avoidant partner that intimacy doesn't have to feel overwhelming, that you're not a threat, that you're okay, whether they're close or far. And here's the kicker. This doesn't just help them. It frees you. Because when you stop relying on words to bridge the gap, you stop over-explaining, you stop begging for reassurance, you stop handing your emotional well-being over to someone else's reaction. You start owning your own state, which is the most powerful position you can take in any relationship. So the next time they pull away, pause. Don't chase with words. Don't fill the silence. Instead, check in with your own body. Breathe, regulate, get present. Because your calm is the medicine. Your stillness is the message. Your groundedness is the thing that speaks to their unconscious mind far louder than any words ever could. When you master that, you're no longer waiting for them to change. You're leading the shift from within. Invisible reparenting is one of the most subtle yet transformative tools you can use when navigating relationships, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies. At its core, it's about becoming the safe, stable presence that you or the other person never had growing up. But instead of doing this through overt gestures, long conversations, or fixing behaviors, you do it quietly, energetically, internally, without fanfare. That's what makes it invisible and so incredibly powerful. To understand how invisible reparenting works, you first need to understand what it means to be parented emotionally. For many people, especially those with insecure attachment styles, Childhood didn't provide the kind of attuned, consistent caregiving their nervous system needed. Maybe they had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, overly critical, absent, or overwhelmed. As a result, they learned to adapt by becoming self-reliant, hyper-independent, anxious, or shut down. They survived by disconnecting from their needs or by trying to meet others' needs to feel safe. That early environment becomes the blueprint for how they relate to intimacy as adults. And here's the key. These patterns are deeply embedded in the nervous system. They're not just mental habits, they're survival strategies hardwired through repeated experiences. So when you engage with an avoidant person, you're not just dealing with who they are in the present, you're interacting with a set of protective responses shaped long before you ever met them. This is where invisible reparenting comes in. It's the process of showing through your energy, your choices, and your self-regulation that a new kind of connection is possible, not through direct intervention or trying to teach them a lesson, but by embodying a kind of steadiness that communicates, you're safe here. I'm not going to invade your space. I'm not going to disappear. I can handle my own emotions. You don't have to manage me. That kind of energy disrupts the old pattern without triggering their defenses. And it starts with you, with how you respond to their withdrawal, with how you manage your own triggers. If you're anxiously attached or deeply sensitive to disconnection, your nervous system might scream, "Fix this now," the moment they go quiet. But instead of acting on that impulse, invisible reparenting invites you to slow down, feel the discomfort, and soothe yourself. That's reparenting you. That's giving yourself the attunement you didn't get growing up by not abandoning yourself just because someone else seems to be pulling away. When you do that, you change the entire dynamic. You stop participating in the old pattern of you withdraw, I chase. Instead, you create a pause in the cycle. And that pause is powerful. It gives the avoidant partner space without punishment. It gives them the experience of being connected without being controlled. That's what starts to loosen their fear-based programming. That's what begins to build trust, not through words, but through your consistent presence and emotional neutrality. Invisible reparenting also means that you're no longer waiting for someone else to meet needs you didn't even realize were unmet. You're not expecting them to make you feel secure. You're learning how to create that security inside yourself. And the more you do that, the less reactive you become, the less triggered you feel, the more compassion you can access for them and for yourself. Because you're not just interacting with their adult behavior anymore. You're seeing the scared child underneath. You're seeing their defense mechanisms, not as rejection, but as protection. This doesn't mean you tolerate bad behavior or stay in unhealthy dynamics. It means you approach the situation with clarity, not desperation. It means you stop trying to change someone through force and start leading through example. You hold space, you set boundaries with love. You detach from the outcome without closing your heart. The most beautiful part? They may not even realize what's happening. They may not consciously register the shift, but their body will feel it. Their nervous system will sense the difference. And over time, that creates the conditions for genuine connection. Not because you pulled them toward you, but because you stopped pulling at all. Invisible reparenting isn't about fixing the avoidant person. It's about breaking the cycle by becoming the calm, attuned presence you always needed. And when you do that, you're not just healing a relationship, you're healing a legacy. When someone has avoidant attachment, the thing they crave the most connection is also what they fear the most. That fear doesn't always show up in dramatic ways. Sometimes it's quiet. They cancel plans last minute, get vague when conversations turn emotional, or seem distant even when they're physically present. To the person on the receiving end, it can feel like rejection or indifference. But what's really happening is a nervous system in self-protection mode. Their brain has learned to equate closeness with danger, losing control, losing identity, or being engulfed. So when intimacy increases, so does their internal alarm. Most people try to respond to this with strategy. They read articles, follow scripts, send carefully crafted texts, and try to say just the right thing to keep the connection alive. They think if they can be patient enough, empathetic enough, or understanding enough, the avoidant person will eventually relax and let them in. But what they don't realize is that strategy, even the most loving, thoughtful kind, still carries a subtle energy of control. It still says, I need you to change so I can feel okay. Avoidant people are hypersensitive to that. Even if your strategy is gentle and kind, if it's coming from anxiety or emotional need, they will feel it. Not because they're overly sensitive or dramatic, but because their nervous system is trained to scan for signs of emotional invasion. They've built their identity around self-sufficiency. So when someone approaches them with energy that says, let me in, let me fix this, let me prove you can trust me, it doesn't feel safe. It feels like pressure. And pressure to an avoidant always triggers distance. This is why safety speaks louder than strategy. Emotional safety isn't about what you say, it's about how you are. When you show up calm, grounded, and unattached to the outcome, you're signaling that you're not a threat, that you don't need anything from them in that moment, that they can be themselves, take space, and still be emotionally connected. This kind of energy is disarming, not because it pushes them to open up, but because it doesn't ask them to. It just allows. The truth is, emotional safety isn't something you tell someone they have. It's something they feel. It's created through consistency, tone of voice, eye contact, body language, and most importantly, your ability to regulate your own nervous system. If you're feeling anxious, abandoned, or triggered, and you try to hide it with words or strategy, they will still feel that dissonance. They'll feel the tension underneath the surface, and they'll back away. Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is picking up on unsafety. Even if you don't say a word. On the flip side, when your presence is genuinely calm, unattached, and accepting, their system begins to relax. You're not pushing, you're not pulling, you're just there. That's when walls begin to lower. That's when they might start reaching out without being prompted. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not linear. But it does happen because you're creating an experience their body has never had before, intimacy without pressure. And that matters more than you think. Most avoidant people don't actually want to be alone. They just want to be free. They want to know they can be close to someone without losing themselves. And when you show them that's possible, not with speeches, but with energy, they begin to associate connection with safety instead of threat. This doesn't mean you shrink yourself or walk on eggshells. It means you become the kind of presence that doesn't demand or chase. You're not doing anything to get a result. You're just being regulated, present, and open. That's what shifts the dynamic. Because now you're no longer caught in the pattern of trying to earn love or prove worth. You've stepped into a different frequency entirely, one where love isn't something you extract from someone, but something you embody. When safety speaks louder than strategy, you don't need to fix the relationship. You don't need to explain or perform. You just keep showing up as the clearest version of yourself, without attachment, without pressure. And in that space, real connection can finally begin to grow. Rewiring the dynamic without saying a word might sound impossible, especially if you've spent years believing that communication is the key to every relationship problem. But when you're dealing with avoidant attachment, the real transformation doesn't happen through talking, it happens through energy, presence, and nervous system alignment. This is a difficult concept to grasp at first because we're conditioned to believe that if something's wrong, we need to address it directly. We need to talk it out, make it clear, solve the problem together. But avoidance isn't a problem that can be solved through conversation because it's not logical, it's neurological. Avoidantly attached people don't shut down because they don't care. They shut down because their nervous system is wired to view intimacy as a threat. Closeness, vulnerability, and emotional neediness activate an internal alarm that says, this is unsafe. And once that alarm goes off, they go into protection mode, either by becoming distant, cold, dismissive, or by detaching from their own emotions entirely. In that state, even the most loving or reasonable words can feel intrusive. The more you try to explain your feelings, the more they feel pressured. The more you seek connection, the more they feel the need to disconnect. That's where the real shift begins. When you stop trying to reach them through words and start shifting the entire dynamic through your way of being. This doesn't mean becoming silent or passive. It means recognizing that your energy, your nervous system, and your internal state are constantly communicating, even when your mouth is closed. And when you become aware of that, you realize how powerful your presence actually is. The first step is learning to hold emotional space, not just for them, but for yourself. When they pull away, your old programming might scream at you to close the gap. Reach out, say something, fix it. But instead, you pause. You check in with your own nervous system. You notice the fear, the ache, the desire for reassurance, and you soothe yourself. You remind yourself you are safe. You ground your body. You breathe through the urge to react, And in that moment, you've already started rewiring the dynamic, not through a single word, but through the choice to respond instead of react. This kind of regulation sends a completely different message to the avoidant partner. It tells them on an unconscious level that you are not going to flood them with emotional intensity. You're not going to demand they process something before they're ready. You're not going to fall apart if they need space. That's the moment their nervous system begins to calm, not because you forced it, but because you modeled calm yourself. It's important to understand this is not manipulation. You're not using silence or self-regulation as a tactic to get a response. You're doing it because you are changing, because you are stepping out of the codependent pattern of taking responsibility for their emotional reactions, because you are learning how to hold your own boundaries without punishment or control. That's what creates the invisible shift. You're not playing the same role in the dynamic anymore. And as a result, they can't play theirs in the same way either. This creates space, real space, not just physical distance, but emotional room for them to process without fear of being chased or blamed. And over time, this space becomes the breeding ground for trust. Because instead of feeling overwhelmed by your need, they start to feel safe in your presence. Instead of retreating automatically, they begin to stay just a little longer. And they might not even realize why. It's because the pattern has changed, and they can feel it. Rewiring the dynamic without saying a word is about stepping into emotional leadership. It's about becoming the calm anchor in a storm of old triggers. It's about realizing that the most healing thing you can offer someone is not a speech, it's a regulated, non-reactive presence. That's what their nervous system never had. That's what yours might have had either. And when you become that for yourself, you naturally extend it to others. So instead of asking, what do I say to fix this? Ask, who am I being in this moment? Because when you shift your state, everything else begins to shift with it. You're not just communicating safety, you're embodying it. And that changes the relationship more deeply than words ever could. The beauty of invisible reparenting is that it doesn't just affect the avoidant partner, it transforms you. When you begin this work, it often starts because you're tired. Tired of feeling like you're chasing love. Tired of over-explaining, overthinking, and waiting for someone else to show up emotionally. Tired of walking on eggshells, hoping that if you just get it right this time, they'll finally stay. But what you eventually realize is that the true shift isn't about them changing, it's about you taking your power back. This is where the healing becomes deeply personal, because invisible reparenting turns the focus inward in the most powerful way. It's no longer about trying to control outcomes or decode someone else's behavior. Instead, it becomes about you tending to the parts of yourself that were never fully seen, soothed, or validated. The parts that learned early on that they had to earn love, that they had to be perfect, patient, or silent to be worthy of attention, that love was always just slightly out of reach. When you stop trying to parent the avoidant person with your words and instead begin to parent yourself through your energy and presence, you break the old pattern. You start witnessing your own emotional waves without judgment. You learn how to sit with the discomfort instead of reacting to it. You become the consistent, loving adult to your inner child, the one who says, I'm here, I've got you, we don't need them to be okay, we are okay. This is the foundation of secure attachment, and it doesn't depend on what the other person does. It's built internally, moment by moment, as you choose not to abandon yourself. And the deeper you go into that inner healing, the less you feel the need to fix, manage, or chase others. You stop trying to earn your worth through relationships because you begin to feel your worth in your body for the first time, maybe ever. What's incredible is that over time, the very energy that once triggered the avoidant person, your anxiety, your urgency, your emotional need, begins to fade. Not because you've suppressed it, but because you've tended to it. You're no longer outsourcing emotional safety. You've learned how to hold space for yourself in ways you were never taught. You've reparented the anxious, abandoned parts of you, and that shift radiates. People feel it. They might not know what changed, but they respond to it. Your boundaries become clearer without being rigid. Your presence becomes softer without being passive. You stop trying to prove anything. You stop performing. You start simply being. And in that being, there is immense strength. This doesn't guarantee that the avoidant person will suddenly become emotionally available. It doesn't guarantee that the relationship will work out. but it does guarantee that you will no longer betray yourself in the pursuit of love. And that is liberation, because you're no longer operating from the wounded part of you that's desperate to be chosen. You're standing in your wholeness, and from that place, your choices become clearer. Sometimes that clarity leads to deeper connection. Sometimes it leads to letting go. But either way, you're no longer stuck in the cycle. You're not waiting for someone to get it. You're not shrinking yourself to stay in proximity to love. You are love. You've learned how to nurture it inside you. And because of that, your relationships begin to reflect it back. This is the quiet revolution that happens when you commit to invisible reparenting. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. No big speeches, no ultimatums. Just a steady, consistent return to yourself. Just a quiet refusal to abandon your heart even when others do. Just a deep, unshakable knowing that you are safe within your own presence. And from that place, everything changes. You start attracting different dynamics. You begin to recognize your own needs sooner and express them with calm clarity. You stop losing yourself in someone else's emotional weather. You start honoring your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Invisible reparenting may start as a way to navigate the chaos of an avoidant relationship, but what it really becomes is the path back to yourself. And that's the healing you didn't even know you were searching for. So here's the truth. What you thought was about them was always ultimately about you. Invisible reparenting isn't a strategy to change someone who's emotionally unavailable. It's a journey that brings you back to emotional sovereignty. It's a quiet revolution where you stop begging for connection and start embodying the safety, the love, and the grounding you always needed. You stop chasing. You stop fixing. You stop performing. And instead, you regulate. You hold. You become the calm in the storm. And in doing so, you do something extraordinary. You create a space that softens defenses, not through force, but through presence. You speak to someone's nervous system before their mind has a chance to build a wall. You offer connection without pressure. You make intimacy feel safe, often for the first time. But the real magic, it's in what happens inside you. You begin to recognize your own worth as non-negotiable. You begin to realize that peace, not performance, is your power. You become the love you were waiting for, and that love starts to shape your entire life. So if you're wondering whether they'll come closer, whether they'll ever get it, stop. That's not the question anymore. The question is, are you willing to be the version of yourself who no longer abandons their own heart to win someone else's? Because when you are, that's when the healing begins, quietly, invisibly, unstoppably.